Have you ever heard of the witching hour? It's that time between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. and the reason they call it that is that they used to say that it was that time of the day between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. where witches and ghosts and things like that are at their most powerful. It was the story that they would tell people. But there is something about that time of the day at 3 a.m. There was a time where I was getting up at 3 a.m. and I didn't understand why. And the reason I'm talking about it is because, as many of you know, back in March, my wife and I, we both got COVID. March of 2020, so over a year ago, back when it was brand new. We didn't know anywhere near as much as we knew today, and the forecasts about the number of people that would be dying were just astronomical. And I remember that there were times where I would be awake at the witching hour at 3 a.m. We had to quarantine in the bedroom, and at that time of the morning, you know, and the way that we had kind of gotten through COVID was that we were kind of trapped in the bedroom, and if we needed a snack or a meal or anything, the kids would bring it and leave it outside. My kids, not just kids in general, but my kids would leave it outside the door and knock, and then they'd scurry away and close their bedroom doors, and then I'd go and pick it up and bring it in. But at 3 in the morning, they're asleep. And so even if I wanted something to eat, I couldn't get it. Terry was asleep, and I was by myself, just kind of laying in the darkness. And there were nights when it was that time of the day or in the morning, and I remember that I would be breathing really heavy, like it was difficult to breathe, and then, you know, you listen to the news and they're telling you, oh, this could be a symptom and this could be a symptom. And so you're kind of have all those things going through your head. And I tell you, when you're in that situation, and especially at that time of the day, you kind of sometimes just lay there. And often I would wonder, wow, you know, I felt the breathing heavy and I thought, is this it? Is this going to be it? And the things that start running through my mind are like, you know, oh, I have to leave instructions for the kids. I need to get a pad or get my phone and record a video to tell them what to do. I mean, what do they do if we have to go to the hospital and you can't go into the hospital and visit? You know, what would they do if one of us didn't make it, or if both of us didn't make it? How were they going to survive? What were the steps that they needed to take? And I'll tell you, as all these things are running through my head, you know, it's like in this most difficult time of my life, there were moments when I thought to myself, God, why? Why is this happening? And I started to question the goodness and the love of God. I did. I think if any of us were in situations like that, and I'm sure that many of you have been in situations like that, and you've probably done the same thing. I mean, have you ever felt that way? That you've had pain or a painful experience and your faith started to crumble? And we start to think to ourselves, why? Why, God, why? Where are you, God? You told me you were going to be there for me, and where are you? And so what do we do when we feel like God isn't there, when we feel like God won't bless us or won't bless the people that we care about with what they need, whether that's healing or restoration or success? What do we do when we are in those situations? Well, we are in our series, Failing Faith, and here in episode 2, what I want to talk about is I want to talk about 3 lies that we tell ourselves or that people whisper into our ear, 3 lies that if we believe them can kill our faith. And I want to do that in the backdrop of this story of an account that happened thousands of years ago with a prophet of God named Elijah. And Elijah was a very fascinating story, this part that we're going to be looking at today. And what actually happened was Elijah, in this particular account, which we're going to be in chapter 19, of the book called 1 Kings, which is in the Old Testament, the part of the Bible that was written before Jesus was born. And in this chapter, Elijah had just come out of this really, really exciting event. And some of you may have heard of this. And what had happened was that there was a kind of a showdown between Elijah, who was the prophet of God. Scripture refers to him as the prophet of Yahweh, because that is how the Israelites referred to God at that time. The prophet of Yahweh and the prophets of Baal, Baal was a pagan god that the Israelites had begun to start worshiping. And so it was a showdown between Elijah and over 400 prophets of Baal. And they were trying to show the king, King Ahab, who was the king of Israel at the time, which of the two gods was the real God. And so Elijah says, okay, this is what we're going to do. You're going to go get 2 bulls. And we're going to build 2 altars. You guys build an altar, I'm going to build an altar. And we're going to cut the bull in half, and then you are going to pray to your God and ask him to bring fire down onto your sacrifice. And then I'm going to pray to my God and ask him to bring fire down on my sacrifice. And whoever's God brings down the fire is the true God. And so they were all for it. Right? So the prophets of Baal, they built this really elaborate altar. And they cut the bull in half, and they started to dance around and pray to Baal, and nothing happened. And so they started dancing around even more intense, and they actually started to stick themselves and cut themselves and let their blood run over the altar, and they were just pleading with Baal to send fire down and to burn their sacrifice. And nothing happened. And so Elijah comes in. He makes a very simple altar made out of 12 stones to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And he puts the bull on top of that simple altar. And then he tells the people to pour water over the bull. If we're going to do this, we're going to do this right. And so he pours water and digs a trench around the altar and pours water all over it. And then he prays. And God sends down fire and burns up the sacrifice, burns up the bull, everything around it. And the people saw this, and they all bowed down, and they said, Yahweh, Yahweh, he is God. Well, Ahab was convinced, but his wife, Jezebel, who was a strong supporter of Baal, in fact, she was the one who brought Baal worship to Israel, she was furious. She was furious that this happened. She was furious at Ahab. She was furious at Elijah for allowing this to happen. And this is where our story begins. And this is what happened as was recorded in Scripture. It says that when Ahab got home, because he had witnessed this, when Ahab got home, he told Jezebel everything that Elijah had done, including the way that he had killed all the prophets of Baal. Now, what happened was, what he's referring to is that afterwards, after the altar was consumed up and the sacrifice was consumed up because God sent the fire, Elijah gave an instruction to arrest all of the prophets, and then the prophets of Baal were all got together, and then they were all executed. And so that's what Ahab is referring to. And Jezebel was just angry because she had supported these prophets. She had backed them financially, and to hear that 400 of them went up against one Elijah and lost really upset her. And so it says, so Jezebel sent this message to Elijah. May the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you just as you killed them. Talking about the prophets of Baal. See, her response was not, oh, now I see, Yahweh must be the one true God. That was the response that Elijah had hoped that not only all of the people would have had, but also that Ahab would have had and that Jezebel would have had. But instead, Jezebel's response was, you are a dead man. That's it. You're a dead man. So it says, when Elijah was afraid and fled for his life, he went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and then and he left his servant there. Now see, this is fascinating thing because Elijah had just come off of, literally just a few hours before, he had come off of watching this miraculous thing that God did. Miraculous. And now he's on the run. He fears for his life. And he heads to Beersheba. Now, Beersheba is about 95 miles to the south that he had to travel to get there. Beersheba was at the very edge of the kingdom. It was the farthest away that he could get from Jezebel and still be inside the kingdom. It says that he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. So it wasn't enough that he got to the edge, to the city that was at the very, very edge of the kingdom. He traveled another day's walk into the wilderness, into the south, to get away. It says he sat down under a solitary broom tree, it's a juniper tree, and prayed that he might die. And see, Elijah knew the power of prayer. Because just a few years ago, Elijah would pray for the rain to stop. And the rain stopped for 3.5 years. And this was a direct assault against against Baal. Because Baal was supposed to be the god of fertility. And so when the rain stopped, everything died. And Elijah prayed that the rain would stop, and for 3.5 years it would stop. And then Elijah came back and he prayed for the fire to come down, and he saw that. And Elijah prayed for the rain to start again, and he saw that. Elijah knew that prayer was powerful. And here he was praying that he would die. In fact, he said something that I've said, and maybe you've said many, many times, using different words. But listen to what he says. He says, I've had enough, Lord. I've had enough, Lord. I'm done. I'm tired. I quit. I don't want any more of this. I am walking away. He says, I have had enough, Lord. And then he says, take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. See, one of the challenges that Elijah is having is the same challenge that you and I have. It's that we think that everything is still about us. That everything that happens in our life is based only on our abilities and our experience and our work. And that's what tripped him up, because he still thought it was about him. And isn't it interesting that he fled because of a threat to kill him, and now that's what he wants to happen to him, is that he wants to be killed? And that's what brings us to our first lie. Because, see, sometimes the circumstances that we are in can tempt us to quit, to give up. And lie number one is that my only choice is to give up. That when we face these difficult circumstances or these challenging times, that something inside us says, man, this is too much, I'm ready to quit. It's what Elijah was facing. But listen to what happens right after this. It says, then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, get up and eat. And I love this because listen what happens. He says he looked around, and there beside his head was some baked bread on hot stones and a jar of water. I mean, isn't that amazing? It was like he's sleeping out in the wilderness. He's under the tree because the sun is pounding down on him. There's nothing around anywhere. Nothing around anywhere. He's gone there to die. And it's like he wakes up and there's a Panera delivery right next to him. Freshly baked bread and a jar of water. And so he did what anyone would do if they woke up and they saw freshly baked bread and a jar of water right next to them. He ate and drank. And then he must have ate and drank too much because he went back to sleep. He lay down again. Then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, get up and eat some more, or the journey ahead will be too much for you. In other words, you're not done yet. I know that you prayed to die. I know that you prayed to be killed, but you are not done yet. You still have stuff to do. So come on, eat some more, drink some more. And so Elijah says, so he got up and ate and drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. Now, Mount Sinai was the place where the Israelites who were slaves in Egypt Moses had led them out of captivity and brought them to Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is the mountain where Moses first encounters God. Mount Sinai is the mountain where God begins his covenant relationship with his people by giving them the tablets that had the 10 Commandments written on them. This is a very significant thing that God is leading Elijah back to this particular mountain. And so it says he leads him to that mountain. It's 40 days and 40 nights travel to get to Mount Sinai. And it says there he came to a cave. Now, I'm not going to go too much into it because scholars have debated about what that phrase, a cave, meant. Most agree, though, that this cave was actually not like a cave where you go in through an entrance, but it was more a cleft in the rock, for those of you who know the old hymn. But it's like an indention in the rock. They believe that this was the same place, this cave, this cleft in the rock, was the same place where Moses met God, where Moses went up and spoke to God. It was in this exact place that Elijah went to, and Elijah spent the night, and he rested. You see, sometimes we think that we need to quit when what we really need is to rest. Sometimes we are so worked out that we just don't have the energy to go on anymore, and we think that we just need to give up, when really what we need is a good sandwich, something to drink, and a little bit of rest. And that's what Elijah needed. That's what God provided, and he was able to continue on. And so there is Elijah, and it says, there he came to a cave where he spent the night. But the Lord said to him, and the Lord asks this question, he says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Now, God knew the answer, but he asked the question probably not to find out the answer, but so that Elijah would actually have something to say. And so it says that Elijah replied, "I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty." In other words, I've done everything that you've asked me to do. And then he says, "But the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." See, Elijah doesn't realize that he's listed all of these things to God as the reasons that he's out there and ready to die, when those are the exact reasons that God needs Elijah to speak to the people on his behalf. Those are the reasons that God wants his prophet to be talking to his people. But God sees Elijah, and God knows what Elijah needs. And so listen to what God does. He says to Elijah this. He says, "Go out and stand before me on the mountain," the Lord said to him. And as Elijah stood there, listen to what happens. As Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by. In the same way that Moses asked to see God, and he passed by. He just passed by him. It says, Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And then it says, and after the fire, there was the sound of a gentle whisper. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever experienced a natural disaster. We lived in Florida for years, and Florida, the natural disaster that we got living in Central Florida was hurricanes. And there was a year when we actually had 3 hurricanes that kind of went across the state, and where we lived was right in the middle of all 3. So we felt the effects of all 3 hurricanes. But, you know, hurricane season comes every year if you live in that area. But one of the interesting things about the hurricane is that right after the hurricane, you get out of the hurricane area, when it spins out of your area, and the rain stops and the sun comes up, it's eerily quiet. It's just very, very quiet. Like everything is still. Everything is quiet. And you can hear everything. And this is what Elijah had experienced. that he had all of these loud, exciting, everything is moving, earth-shaking things going on around him. But where he saw God, where he experienced God, was in the stillness and in the quiet. It says that when Elijah heard it, that still voice, that gentle whisper, that some of you may have heard it from the old King James Version, where they referred to it as the still small voice of God. He says when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. You see, sometimes our circumstances can tempt us into thinking that God's silence is God's absence. And that's lie number 2. Lie number 2 is says that if I can't see God, then God isn't there. If I can't see God in the big, miraculous, big, loud, big, earth-shattering, earth-shaking things, if I don't see God in that, then God must not be there. But you see, in that gentle, soft whisper, God taught Elijah something important that is an important lesson for you and me too. That occasionally he does work in the ground-breaking, soil-shaking, earth-moving miracle. He does that. And Elijah in his life has experienced that over and over again. But sometimes God isn't in the wind. Sometimes he's not in the earthquake. Sometimes he's not in the fire. Sometimes he is in that soft, gentle whisper. See, sometimes he works in ways that are easy to see, but sometimes he works in ways that are right in front of our faces, but we don't see them. That aren't through these amazing things, but he moves and he communicates in that soft, gentle whisper. And he does that still today. See, sometimes he communicates to us in that whisper, and that whisper is actually a conversation that we have with a friend. That whisper is a song that we hear, a sunset that we get to experience, a walk along the beach, a quiet moment at home, or even the drive home from work. You see, we only look for God where we think he is. When we only look for God where we think he is, we may miss seeing him where he really is. And when our problems don't seem to be answered, we can be tempted to think that God has just vanished, that he's not there. That when we see a problem in front of us and we don't see God immediately move, that we think that God is not going to move at all and God is not going to move ever. And so we limp through the desert, we limp through the valleys of our lives, believing that we've been abandoned. And we look up at God and we say, God, where is the wind? Where is the fire? Where is the earthquake? We ask it like this: God, where is my healing? Where is that new job? Where am I going to find the money to pay this bill? Where is going to be my opportunity to restore this relationship? Where is the miracle, God? But see, just because we don't see it where we want to see it, it doesn't mean that it's not there. There's an ancient Japanese painting technique called Nihonga. Now, Nihonga actually means Japanese-style painting. But there is an artist, and his name is Makoto Fujimura, and he's one of the leading artists of Nihonga, and he's also a follower of Jesus. He's a Christian. And Nihonga involves crushing things like oyster shells or even silver and gold. They're crushed into tiny particles, and then they're used as ingredients in the art. And this whole process of Nihonga is very complicated, it's very labor intensive, but it has both an immediate and a long-term effect. You see, as Nihonga paintings age, as the environment and the weather, the temperature start to affect the painting, the minerals and the things that were painted on top with the oyster shell and the gold and the silver, they start to fade, they start to change. And what happens is that over time, that those things that they had put on, that layered on the top, they kind of fade away, and it reveals the strokes of the painting that were found underneath, that were always there. The air, the atmosphere, the circumstances that surround the painting transform this unique piece of art and reveals not just what was in the front that you could see right away, but what was hidden in the back, what was there all along, but we just couldn't see it. That the circumstances let the bottom layer bleed through to the top. See, what Fujimura, as a Nihonga artist, understands is that what he's creating on the surface is not going to be there forever. And like these paintings, sometimes what we see on the surface of life's painful moments won't be there forever. There is something in the background. There is something behind it. We can't see it, but it's always been there. We just haven't seen it yet. And it's going to come out. And that's the same way with oftentimes how God works. That we can fall into believing this lie that because we don't see or hear God immediately, that God isn't there. And we just don't recognize that He's always there in the background. Is His promises working for the good of those who love Him. The story, this particular account, it wraps up like this. It says, when Elijah heard it, this is the soft, gentle whisper, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And a voice said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" The same question that God had asked him before, God's asking him again. And Elijah replies again, the exact same reply that he gave God before. He says, "I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty. But the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets." He says, "I am the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too. I'm the only one left. There is no one else. I'm all by myself, facing this all alone." You see, our circumstances can tempt us to believe that we're all alone, that we're the only one who has ever faced these circumstances. No one else could ever understand what it is that we're going through. And that is the third lie. The third lie is the lie that says that I have to face this alone. Listen to what God says when Elijah says, "I'm alone now." He says, "Then the Lord told him, go back the same way you came." In other words, I know you came all the way down here. I want you to go back now and travel to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive there, anoint Hazael to be king of Aram. Now, Beersheba is as far south as you can get in the kingdom. Damascus is as far north as you can get in the kingdom. And so God wants him to do a complete 180 all the way back. And he says, find Hazael, you're going to anoint him to be king of Aram. And then he says, then anoint Jehu, grandson of Nimshi, to be king of Israel. And anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from the town of Abel Meholah, to replace you as my prophet. So God is saying, listen, there are 3 people I want you to connect with right now, because those 3 people are going to help you. He says, go and connect with Hazael. Go and connect with Jehu. And then go and connect with Elisha. Because Elisha is not only going to help you, but he's eventually going to walk by your side, and then he's going to take over for you. And he says, now listen, I know you're thinking it's just 3 guys, but don't worry. Because he says, anyone who escapes from Hazael will be killed by Jehu. And those who escape Jehu will be killed by Elisha. You're not alone, Elijah. You're not in this by yourself. He says there's 3 guys that are going to help you out. But if that's not enough, listen to what he says yet. He says, yet I will preserve 7,000 others in Israel. So it's not just 3, but there's an additional 7,000 others who have never bowed down to Baal or kissed him. See, here's Elijah, and he finds himself on Mount Sinai, the place where God initiated the covenant relationship with the Israelites. The place where God took his people to after delivering them from slavery in Egypt. And by leading Elijah to Mount Sinai, to this same cleft in the rock that Moses had stood. God is subtly reminding Elijah of his faithfulness in the past as a promise of his faithfulness in the future. And even though the present seemed dark and it seemed without hope, God wanted Elijah to remember that he was faithful to those who had come before him and that he wouldn't forget about Elijah either. Connecting with others who have experienced the same thing, who've gone through the same thing, or are going through the same thing, or will at some time in the future go through the same thing. Connecting with other people who share your values and share your faith is so important, because that connection, especially in this culture that we live in today, is so difficult to get sometimes. A few years ago, there was a performance artist, and her name was Maria, I'm going to butcher this, Maria Abramovic. And she had a presentation at New York's Museum of Modern Art called The Artist is Present. And what she did was, for months, she sat down at a table across from a chair, and she would invite the visitors to the exhibit to sit down in the chair across from her for 30 seconds. And all she would do was that she would ask them to just look at her, and she would just stare back at them. She didn't speak, she didn't laugh, she didn't make any hand gestures. All she did really was lean in and stare at them. She leaned in and looked at them. She leaned in to connect with them. People would line up for hours for the chance to just sit in that chair and look at this artist for 30 seconds. And one of the things that people found the most bizarre was that there were scores of people who left that presentation in tears. They were overcome with emotion just at that gaze from Abramovich, overcome with emotion because of Abramovich's gaze. They couldn't help but cry because they felt that connection. An author who witnessed this wrote this: "The attraction that Abramovich exerted simply by announcing and sustaining her presence was perhaps a measure of and a temporary antidote to the profound alienation we feel from one another and from ourselves. What does it say about us that we have to go to an art museum to find connection with another soul?" It's one of the big challenges that we face today is we have trouble actually making real connections with people. Sure, we have our phones and we have our tablets and we have our computers and we can make connections with people online, texting, Zoom. Some people still actually voice call today. I thought that we had gotten rid of that, but apparently that's still a thing where people use the phone to phone someone else. But that face-to-face connection, especially given what we've gone through last year, is so powerful. To be able to connect with people is such a powerful thing. And it is natural for us to feel like when we're dealing with a problem that we are the only ones that understand our problem. Because, of course, we're the only one that knows all of the details of our problem. We're the one that's right in the middle of it. And oftentimes, the last thing that we want to do is we don't want to talk about it, right? The last thing we want to do is to talk about it. The last thing we would think of doing is to ask for help. But I believe, and I know that there are many of you who have experienced that one of the greatest gifts that God has given followers of Jesus, one of the greatest gifts that He has given us is other followers of Jesus. Others who bring into a connection with us their experiences, that bring into that connection their faith, that bring into that connection the things that God has brought them through. And that's why it's so important for you to be connected somewhere to a church family. We welcome everybody here at Gracepoint, but wherever you can find a Bible-believing church, I encourage you to get connected personally into a church family. Because we were not created to live life alone. And there is something about us being together that strengthens each other's faith. See, we have to recognize this truth. God uses my faith to strengthen you, but God uses your faith to strengthen me. That we strengthen each other, that we strengthen each other's faith as we talk about and relate with the struggles that we face, and we share how God has taken us through them. God uses my faith to strengthen you, but I rely on God using your faith to strengthen me. See, at the end of the day, what all of this really means is that there's really one question that we all ask. And that question is really this: whether you're a Christian or not, the question that we have for God is, will God be there for me? Will God be there for me when I'm laying at home with a disease that no one knows really if there's ever going to be a cure or what to do? And will God be there for me? Will God be there for me when my marriage is falling apart or my relationship with my children are falling apart? Will God be there for me when I can't pay those bills or when I can't find a job? Will God be there for me in the times that I really need God? And God answered that question. He answered that question with Jesus. See, in life, Jesus was God coming to us. That God would take a human form in order to come close to us. But through his death and his resurrection, Jesus made a way for us to be able to freely go to God anytime that we want to. So when you ask the question, will God be there for me? Then I want to tell you, yes, God will be there for you. You may not see it at first glance. You may not see it because it's hidden in something, it's behind something. You may not recognize it because you expected it to come in a different way than it actually came. And listen, you may be surprised at the person that God uses to show you that God is there for you. I am so blessed by so many of you online and so many of you who attend here in person, who God has allowed to strengthen my faith because of the stories that you have told me and the things that you have shared with me. And I hope and pray for me and for all of you that God would continue to give us opportunities to share with others and be the source of strength for their faith too. It's a privilege, and it's just been one of the best blessings of my life. And I know it can be for you too.